All right, I'll be reading this morning from 1 Timothy chapter 3, starting with verse 14. Although I hope to come to you soon, I'm writing you these instructions so that if I am delayed, you will know how people ought to conduct themselves in God's household, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and foundation of the truth. Beyond all question, the mystery of godliness is great. He appeared in a body, was vindicated by the Spirit, was seen by angels, was preached among the nations, was believed on in the world, and was taken up in glory. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you for the day. We thank you for our blessings. And at this time, we thank you for your word and the opportunity we have to study it unhindered. We pray that as we do so, that you'll help us in understanding and application to our lives. In your Son's name, amen. All right. All right, last week we were talking about what Christian leadership should look like. We started off with a discussion about overseers and bishops. We had pointed out the fact that they're also referred to as, what else? Pastors and elders, or shepherds. Pastors, shepherds, same word, and elders, which is elder. That's pretty much what used ever since Old Testament. Overseers and bishops, same term. Started off by saying that they should desire the work. One thing I didn't point out was they should desire what? It didn't say the position, the work. It's a job. I thought about it, and I knew we got a couple of previous elders here, and I think they'll testify to the fact that it is, in fact, a work, if you do it right. And it's hard to do right, to be honest with you. But it's a work, it's not a position. So if you aspire to a position, you're aspiring to the wrong thing, because it's a job. All right? It's a function in the church. Too many people think of it as a place of authority, which it is, but they look at it as position rather than a job with a responsibility to oversee and manage. Okay, so if you desire it, it's a good thing. That's a great thing, because that's the first requirement for anyone to do. It's a service. Well, yes. All right, he goes on to say they must have good character, specifically blameless, temperate, respectable, self-controlled, and hospitable. He must act properly. That means they should be able to teach. They shouldn't be given to alcohol. They shouldn't be quarrelsome or violent. They should not be a lover of money. And then it says that his personal life is important as well. See, a lot of times when you have a position in the world, in your business, you can be the CEO of a lot of the things, but your personal life is your personal life. Or you may be a teacher or a gas station. No, they don't have gas station attendants anymore, do they? That's a swipe. But, whatever your job is, a lot of times it's related to your job, and we try to separate that from our personal life and what we do in our personal life. Matter of fact, the laws are written such that it says, what a person does in person really shouldn't affect what they do. But in this situation, in the church, in this responsibility that God has there, he says there are some personal life issues that are important. First of all, it says a husband of one wife. We pointed out the fact that he's a person committed to his wife, one, and not a polygamist and not a philanthropist or whatever other words you want to use and all those kind of things. One thing I didn't point out is it said husband. That's a man. Okay? We didn't point that out, but there is that issue in places today that they think they ought to be a female. That's not what God intended. And we talked a little bit about a relationship and roles in male and female and responsibilities previously to this in a previous chapter. But it is a husband of one wife. Not only that, he must manage his children. You can do that, then there's a possibility that you can manage the children of God. Think of it that way. It's kind of one to the other. The other thing, not a novice or a new convert, someone who's been around and studied the faith and knows a little bit about what God wants more than just understanding the gospel. See, a person can become a Christian without knowing anything other than Christ died for them so that they could live with him for eternity. If they understand that, and their responsibility is to commit their lives in trust and faith to him through the death, burial, and resurrection, as seen in baptism, that's all they have to know. Too many times we sit here and try to indoctrinate people and before they become a Christian, and by teaching them all kinds of other stuff that really doesn't pertain to becoming committed to God. That's the key. After that, that's a novice right there. After that, it takes more than that, and that's what they're saying. Don't be a novice. And as it's pointed out in other places that Paul writes, specifically to Titus and some others, elder is also a title there, or a title that goes along with this, which has to do with older. Someone that has not just older in the faith, which is what not a novice means, but also older in life, because that context comes in bringing the fact that they have some experience upon which to draw upon, not just a kid. And I remember when I first got out of college and whatever and became a man and married and thought I was everything, I was very active. As a matter of fact, I was a deacon and everything else, but impetuous, all the different things a young man would do. And you need those kind of folks to drive forward, but you need somebody also managing the steering wheel and the brake, and that's an older person, older man. All right, we talked about that. We were supposed to talk about deacons. We never made it there, so I want to talk about that for a few minutes before we go too much further. So in chapter 3, starting about verse 8, he says, deacons likewise are to be men of, and starts talking about them. So the first thing is, what is a deacon? Servant. Literally, it is an office of servant. If you want to think about it, that's what the job is. That's what it is. It's an office of servant. And you think, wow, that doesn't make sense. Office, position, servant, not a position. That's what it is. It's a position of being a servant. And it's a servant leader in a particular aspect or whatever. So, should be willing to serve. Let me get over here back to last week's lessons. There it is. All right. They should be men that are worthy of respect. Why is respect important? You can't lead if they don't respect you. And even as an office of a servant, you are responsible for leading and getting things done. If you remember the first 7, they weren't called that, but that's what their job was that was appointed. In Acts, their job is to look after the Grecian widows. They were appointed men of respect, men of the word. They were given that job in order that they could do it. What kind of ability would they have had to deal with these Grecian women and take care of them if they didn't respect them, to look out for them? So the church needed to respect them as well as those that are following them and helping them in that aspect. So first, worthy of respect. And that breaks down to, he says, sincere. Why is sincerity important? You ever recognized a fake?
Double-minded man is unstable in all his ways.
Double-minded, yeah. Fake. People know a fake when they see one, don't they? And therefore, you're not going to be respected if someone sees one that is hypocritical, not sincere, trying to get the position, but not really trying to do the job. All right? Not indulging in much wine. Pretty much the same thing as the responsibility of an elder. Not a drunk, not one who drinks to excess, not one who drinks too much, as in an alcoholic. It's the same context. Don't abuse the alcohol. Not pursuing dishonest gain. What does it mean to pursue dishonest gain? On the elder it said not a lover of money. That has to do with an attitude and a desire. This here is an action that says not pursuing dishonest gain. Do what? Don't be a crook. Same thing. Don't be a crook. Yeah, we see that as real real easy to see, but there's more things than being a crook. There's jobs and professions out there that are ways to make money to take advantage of people. And that was really bad about back in that time or whatever with people who had power. They used their jobs to take advantage of them. And when you think of the 12 apostles, can you name one? Matthew. You wouldn't want to be a tax collector. If you would want to be the squeaky clean tax collector that benefited all the people around you, and they understood that you were looking out for them instead of taking advantage of them. Yes, ma'am. Have access. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So it's from the standpoint of the church funds and abusing that as well. Okay. But a dishonest gain is really concentrating on their outside life and their job, and they're a person that are trying to figure out a way to make money at any expense. It doesn't matter who it is. And that was one of the two reasons, if you recall, that the children of Israel were taken into captivity. I've said this about 1,000 times, so hopefully we're getting that. The first one was because they chose other gods. But the other one was that they looked out for themselves so much that they took advantage of the helpless, the widows, the orphans, those who were the strangers, the people that could not help themselves. They took advantage of them. Okay? And that's what, so here it is. It's all through God's word. He does not accept that. Okay. So, don't pursue dishonest gain, untrustworthy. The other thing is, he says that they must, verse 9, must hold to the deep truths of the faith with a clear conscience. What's the deep truths of the faith? Basically, the apostles' doctrine, the gospel, good news of Jesus, what he did and what he expects us to do, and then the apostles' doctrine there. Must hold to these deep truths. They must be a believer, not just a worker. See, there's a lot of folks that are willing to work. I'll be a servant and help out because I think it's a good thing to be benevolent. But it's more than that. They have to be a devout Christian. Think of those 7. What happened to Stephen? He was preaching and stoned for it. What happened to Philip? He was preaching on the road to wherever, and the eunuch was baptized. These were not just somebody who doled out resources to the Grecian widows. Yes, sir. Okay. All right. Have a clear conscience. How can you have a good, clear conscience? Is everybody without sin in here? How can you have a clear conscience? All right. Number 1 is I am doing the best I can. And number 2, God has forgiven me. 2 parts. There's always 2 parts. Look at every agreement in the Bible, every covenant, everything there was. What God does, what I do. And that's what it basically is. You want a clear conscience? Make every effort to do what you can to do what is right and trust God to forgive you because he said he would. All right. He goes on to say they must first be tested. What does it mean by that? Like Kirk just had a test here a minute ago, you know? Test.
Somebody is already doing the work. That's one of the ways that we look and see and bring the deacon on because they're already.
That's true. There you go. Must be first tested. See that they are. In other words, and once again, they're not a novice. They've been doing stuff. They've been working. You can see their faith that they talk about, the deep truths of the faith. You can see their character, and you see them at work. They're already taking care of the widows in some way or whatever, trying to help. Well, now you turn around and basically say, recognize them for that and put them in a position, not just having doing the work, but one that has responsibility and authority to carry out that work. Okay? That's how you test them. All right? Thanks, John. All right. Next, it says in verse 11, in the same way, their wives. Wait a minute. We're back on women. I told my wife asked, "Are we going to talk about women again today?" And I said, "Not that I know of, but if I look over at you, I might think of something." She said, "Don't worry, I'm coming back." It does say their wives. So we're talking about a deacon's wife here. No comments. Possibly. The Greek actually says is the same for wife as it is for women. And so some people will say it's not just the deacon's wife, but women who are deaconesses, which is not necessarily there, but it's the women that are affiliated with those and working with the men that are doing these jobs. Keep in mind that, as we talked about last week maybe, women were created to be what? A helper, right beside me. Two together works. Matter of fact, Tony said it many times when we start talking about deacons and stuff, different ones. Preachers, we're not just selecting deacons, we're selecting the other half that's working with them. When we hire preachers, youth ministers, and different ones, we're looking at the ones that are beside them. So when it talks about this, he's specifically addressing, I believe, the wives of deacons. It's in the context, and it's going to jump back to deacons, but it does mean women. Yes, sir?
Well, why do you think it does have anything to do that elders' wives are not?
That's another question. Why is that? So elders' wives don't have to worry about nothing, right? Yes, sir?
When it begins this, if you look, it says in the same way.
In the same way?
After it, it's just done the elder part.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what the book says. Anybody read the book? No. We buy it so that you can have two lessons, theirs and mine. They say, and that's a good point, God says what he wants to say and doesn't say what he doesn't want to say. He didn't have anything to say about it, so he didn't say anything about it. Doesn't mean it's right, wrong, or indifferent. That's a valid point. Just because he didn't say it doesn't mean there aren't requirements there. I think it was Paul speaking about the elders and trying to talk about them, and then talking about deacons, and then he said, and by the way, their women, or their wives, should be like this. And basically it talks about character of a woman or whatever, which he's already addressed in the previous chapter. But
it just sticks a little paragraph in there and then goes right back to deacons.
that he does. So based on that, in the context, I'm saying it was specifically directed toward the deacons' wives. But I say that if an elder's wife is any different than this, the elder has an issue. I'll just say it right now.
It's just an odd thing.
It is an odd, and that's what the writer in there pointed out. And he says, and I don't know why God writes the way he writes, but that's what he wrote. And that's a good way to look at it too, I guess.
We have other instances where the word showing women as a deacon is.
Yeah, but it's never. We'll get to that probably not next week, but the week after. We're going to talk a little bit about deaconesses or on the list and some things like that. Timothy talks about some specific women that are serving, and we'll talk about that a little bit longer. So I'm going to say this again. In the context, it's talking about the wives of a deacon. But overall, it's still, the word could use for women that are doing these kinds of work or whatever and related to them. All right, let's start over here. Oh, I'm sorry, wait a minute, freeze. Wait a minute. I apologize. She has been waiting for waving her hand for a long time. So I'm going to go first, yes.
When you look at the elder, the thing that comes to the surface to me is that they're overseer and have responsibilities. And deacon is active in actually serving and doing the physical work. But I know that people will sometimes come to the elder's wife and say, would you please ask your husband this, and this? Well, I'm not his helpmate on those decisions.
That's a good point.
That's his responsibility. I always think, I will pray for you, but if you have something like that, you need to go to the elder.
Okay, that's a good point. And I want to go ahead and say that. I'll make sure everybody understood that. And that could be an explanation for this, because as an elder's wife, even though it's supposed to be of good character and all that, they are not helping in the overseeing of the church, even though some places some do, and in some places some think they do, and they try to go to them to go around going directly to the elder. Good point there, okay? Whereas in a deacon, his wife is working alongside with him actively into it. All right, Tony. There you go. There you go. Now you're going to get a nice lunch today. John. Okay.
No matter what our work is, no matter who we are, we're package deal. We're package deal. I mean, we're paired up. And there's a lot of communication that we have that is just between us, but we have balance both of them.
Okay. There's a package deal, and that goes with the help meet or whatever. And that's a true thing. If your spouse is weak, what is she going to do? Drag you down. If she's strong, what is she going to do? Lift you up, you know? So between the two of you, whatever, so that's a good thing. All right, last comment on this, I'm going to move on. Yes, sir.
This reminds me of my time in the military as an Army officer. Dean was the colonel's wife. I'm the colonel. The duties and responsibilities are mine and mine alone, although she has a definite role, mission, function, keeping the home front going, keeping everything working, and she gets a due amount of respect by being the colonel's wife. But she just doesn't have that same responsibility that is given to the elders. The elders have a responsibility. The wives are there for support and help and any medical, and they are due a certain level of respect.
And in many ways, they suffer the consequences.
Exactly, they sure do.
Okay, moving on. All right, what's the next? I paused long enough to give everybody plenty of time there.
We're in 11, and you haven't talked about what they are to be yet.
Yeah, I know. That's true. Well, I started with the first question is, what does that word mean? All right. All right, now, their wives or women, or leaders, or whatever they may be, it says that these women are worthy of respect. Where? Everywhere. In and out of the church. In and out of the church. Just like we talked about, really this whole section is talking about what the church looks like. And this is talking about what these leaders and their wives look like. Whether they're outside that door or inside this door, when somebody looks at them, this is what they should be. Worthy of respect. Goes on to say, not malicious talkers. What's a malicious talker? Gossips. I may even use that term there. Nope, doesn't. Just says malicious talkers. Gossips. What else? Troublemakers. You know, sometimes malicious, you can say bad things about somebody and just kind of, stir up things. It's not just, oh, did you hear what I heard? That's gossip. That's passing on something that you heard, true or not true.
My translation uses the word not slanderers.
Slanderers. Okay. Speaking bad of a person. Okay. Slanderers. Malicious talkers. It includes all of that comes with the use of the voice and in talking. Okay? Incidentally, no incidentally. I'm not going to go back there. I'm just going to say that if you go back to chapter 2, that was an issue again. Okay? So that was an issue with them. All right, the next thing it says is they must be temperate. Just like the deacon, just like an elder, they are to be temperate as well. What is temperate? Moderate. Even-tempered, in the middle. not given to extremes. There's several different ways, all right? Trustworthy in everything. Someone that you could confide in, that you can talk to. You see, if they're a malicious talker, can you confide in them? Can you trust them? No. But it needs to be somebody that you can count on, not just with what you say, but with what you do to support you, help you, whatever, whether it be another woman or your husband or whatever it may be. They need to be trustworthy in everything. Then it jumps back and says, so that was like an aside. That's why I pointed that out in the context of a deacon must be the husband of but one wife. Same qualification as an elder. Same qualification, husband, male, one wife, not a polygamist, not someone who's running around on his wife. It needs to be someone that's committed to his wife. And he goes on to say not only that, but his children and his house, manages children and household well. Not just his children, but his household. What does a household consist of? All those living under his roof or dealing with you, that are all those things. We talk on Wednesday nights, we're talking about Abraham, and how he had a large household, and which included servants, slaves, voluntary slaves, and ones that were purchased. Whatever was in his responsibility, I guess is the best way to do it. That's his household. Okay? He's to manage whatever's his responsibility and manage it well. Yeah, Butch? I think it's just a matter of the way it was written, to be honest with you. They both mean basically the same thing. Only one wife, and one wife is still one wife. I don't see a distinction. Okay? All right, going on. He says that those who served well gain an excellent standing and great assurance in their faith. In other words, they're going to get a blessing out of this by serving in this capacity. God will see to it that they're blessed and taken care of. Does that mean they're going to get rich? Ask Stephen. No. Was he blessed? Yes. Not the way the world measures it, but yes. Okay, so we need to keep those things in mind. But he will get a great assurance in their faith through Christ. He will be blessed. All right. That's deacons. Today's lesson, once again, we're running behind. It's all Corey's fault, but he told me it was all y'all's fault. It started this chain reaction. That's all right. We'll get there. All right. I want to look at 1 Timothy. Now we're going to be looking at verses 14 through about verse 8. Probably won't get to there, of chapter 4. This is what I call, in my notes, part 3 of what the church is supposed to look like. He's talked about individual men, women, different things. Then he went and talked about the leadership, what the leadership's supposed to look like. Now he's going to talk about what the church as a whole should look like, all right? And he goes on to here, and first of all, he says, I'm writing these instructions. Why? In other words, everything he's written up to this point and what he's about to write, so that you can teach them, that you'll have them. You'll know how these people ought to conduct themselves. See, this is where I am talking about this being part 3 of 3 parts about conduct. How men and women are to conduct themselves. And in chapter 2, how the leadership's supposed to conduct themselves. In chapter 3. And so that's where we're at. And so he says, I'm writing all this stuff so that you know how these different people are to conduct themselves. And then he goes on to say that conduct themselves in God's household, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and foundation of truth. Okay? So he's saying here, this is what God's household should look like. All right? And it's also referred to as the church. Okay? God's household, the church, the kingdom, all these terms are all the same. They're just different ways of looking at God's people. Okay? So here he says that they are the church. The church means those that are called out. Called out of what? The world. They're called out of the world. Why? Because they belong to who? Where's God reside? In heaven. That's why Paul says they were called out of the world and they belong to my household in heaven, part of my family, part of his responsibility. They just reside in a different place. They reside in this world. Okay? So he says this, and he talks about the living God. And I think one of the reasons he points out the living God is here we are in Ephesus, which is where Timothy is at. And in Ephesus, most of the worship was to what? Diana. Idols. They were to dead gods. Gods that they performed rituals. Most of them not what God would want you to do. Most of them are sexual in nature. They were rituals. What he has is the living God that you interact with, and you are a part of his household. All those other people that were serving Diana and the gods, the Greek gods and everything, they weren't part of anything. They just went through a motion that they were told to do, an action. Here, this is more of a relationship. This is something you have here as a relationship with the living God. Okay? Part of God's family. And he goes on to say, the church is the pillar and foundation of truth. Wow, what does that mean?
That is where God's word resides. It comes forth from.
Okay? If you're in this earth, on this earth and you want to find truth, where do you find it? In God's family, the church. That's where he put it. That's the foundation, the place to find it. And he's about to explain what truth is. And so he says that truth is found when you look at my people, my household, these people we're talking about, y'all Ephesian church here. This is what we're talking about. And then he goes on from there and defines it. He talks about the mystery of godliness is great. Okay, all right. What is a great mystery? What does that mean?
The plan of salvation.
Plan of salvation.
How God.
Pretty well. Yep. How God took a man who rebels against him and cleans him up and makes him part of his family. That's mystery. Mystery means, actually, that's the great mystery of. The mystery means it was unknown. Nobody knows. It was very difficult to understand. Nobody had any concept. Why do you think people went around following after Greek gods, Roman gods, whatever? Nobody could understand what it was. It was hidden. Paul talks about the mystery that he is given the responsibility of doing, and it was hidden for all this time. He goes on to say, this mystery is how we are to live in this world. That's the mystery.
We're told that even angels wanted to see it,
Yep.
but did not know it and did not understand it.
Did not understand it. As a matter of fact, I'll touch on that in just a minute when we get to that, but it's the mystery is how we're to live in this world. He goes on to define it in the next few verses. He says, in the same verse, and he starts off with what we read a minute ago. He appeared in the body, was vindicated by the Spirit, seen by angels, preached among the nations, believed on in the world, and was taken up in glory. He came to this earth and he walked among us. John tells us he came here so that we could see the light. We could see what God was like, to see how we are to live. Until then, it was man's whatever they could understand, and only the Jews were given an idea what that meant when you looked at the law. Okay? It's how we are to be without sin. And he goes on to say, he was vindicated by the Spirit, or he was found guilty of sin and taken all the penalty for sin, but the angel, or the Spirit, vindicated him and said he was without sin and raised him from the dead. Okay? Even though he took the penalty, he was without sin. He demonstrated to us, this is what it's like to be godly. Showed us on earth, vindicated by the Spirit, and this was confirmed by heavenly beings. As John made reference to, The angels in Ephesians chapter 3 and verse 10 says that they were in awe when the mystery was revealed, how God, before creation, had a plan that he was going to bring into place to create a being with a choice, and that being with a choice would choose him and still be sinful, but God would in fact make him whole where he could live in heaven. And Ephesians chapter 3 was written all about the mystery and how it was suddenly revealed, and now the angels and all the heavenly principalities could see, including Satan, could see what God had done, and they were amazed. Okay? Ephesians 3 goes on to talk about this in great detail and about this mystery. And the thing I want us to remember is, where is Timothy? Ephesus. He's already written this book, this letter to Ephesians here a few years ago while he was in prison. They already have this. They already know what that mystery is. And now he's reminding them again of what it is. Okay? So he goes on to say that Jesus ascended to rule at the right hand of God. He was taken up in glory. And that his good news, which is death, burial, and resurrection, the gospel, was preached to all, to everyone. Everyone was given that message. And many believed and accepted how he made them righteous or holy, godly. See, this is where we start talking about how to become that godly. And he's saying, here's how it's done. In contrast, he goes on in the first few verses of chapter 4 and says that in later times, in the last times, however you want to look at, which is that period of time till the end of time, some are going to abandon the faith, what they've been taught, and follow deceiving spirits and things taught by demons, who are controlled by who? Satan. They're going to teach, believe things that are them. And they're going to talk about, they come through hypocritical liars whose conscience have been seared. They're two-faced and they lie. Who does that sound like? Satan. The demons and all these spirits that follow after are teaching the same message. As a matter of fact, he's going to teach them some things or whatever that man should do in order to become godly. Some actions they need to do to become godly. Once again, the emphasis is there as Satan is coming back to the lie he used in Genesis chapter 3. You don't need to trust God. You can do it yourself, Eve. You just need to know what it is. Be as smart, get that understanding from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Well, here he's saying, you can work your way there. Here's some things you can do. And so he's going back to that same deceiver lie that he used back then. And he's using them in the church. He goes on to say that these are hypocritical liars and their conscience is seared. In other words, even though they know better, it's like they've been cut and then burned over and you can't feel anything. There's no nerves left. You can't penetrate it. All right? And so he says that, and then he goes on, and I'm going to finish this part real quick, and then we'll come back and talk about it a little bit more next week. But he goes on to say that it's the same lie that Satan used. They use their own logic and their reasoning on how they can become godly instead of, which is the question there, way back up in the beginning, the mystery of godliness. They can become godly if they will just do certain things. And the things that he references here is they forbid people to marry and order them to abstain from certain foods. Basically, they make some rules about things that bring pleasure to man. Okay? And the reality is, when they start talking about this, these are things, they were using the concept that the lie was this: the physical in this world is bad. Everything about it is bad. Only the spiritual, the unseen things is good. Therefore, since sex brings pleasure, you can't have that. since food brings pleasure, you can't have that. You just got to eat whatever. All of the things in this world that bring pleasure, you can't do it. You have to be, and I think it's asceticism or something like that. I'm never good at pronouncing that word. But that's the belief in that, and they basically beat yourself up and everything because of that. And so they were saying, if you'll just beat yourself up and refuse to accept any pleasure in this world, then you'll be godly. That's not what God had said. And so he turns around and he said, and the other thing related to this is, I want to get across, is this is what is called Pre-Gnostic Teachings. Gnostic was a thing that came about at the end of the first century, but it began long before that. John writes about it multiple times in his epistles. And it's the same idea that it eventually gets to a point where they say Jesus, when he was here on this earth, since physical is bad, he actually left and was not part of walking on this earth. He came back at the time of the resurrection. His spirit did. And so therefore, his physical body, he really didn't endure all this and go through all that, which is a falsehood. And he does all this, and John writes about it. And guess where John was writing from? Ephesians. So Ephesus. So Ephesus once again becomes a focal point for a whole lot of things. So I want to keep going back to that. All right, we're out of time. John?
I just wanted to point out that it's interesting that those two particular things are also things that were bound over in the Catholic Church.
Yes, it is. And I figured that would be the conversation. That's why I said we would address that next week. or come back and stand on this particular point or whatever. Because that is very true. It's ironic, since it was written right here, that they would go, oops, I probably shouldn't do that. Let's make up a different rule. You know what I mean? But yeah, that is. All right, appreciate it. I know I rushed through it and I'm out of time. Next week, we'll take a look at the next lesson, which continues on with some responsibilities for Timothy on how to address some issues or whatever that he's given that responsibility there in the church to do, as well as wrap up and talk a little bit more about what we just finished. All right, thanks.